The Muhammad Cartoon Controversy for Everybody Draw Muhammad Day, 2016.
During the course of this video, you will see in-video citations like what you see right here. This is indicating the source that I'm getting the information from. And if you see no in-video citations, that would mean that I'm using this book right here, Jyllands-Posten, The Cartoons That Shook the World. Modern secular society is rejected by some Muslims. They demand a special position, insisting on special consideration of their own religious feelings. It is incompatible with contemporary democracy and freedom of speech, where one must be ready to put up with insults, mockery, and ridicule. We are on our way to a slippery slope where no one can tell how the self-censorship will end. That is why Jyllands-Posten has invited members of the Danish Editorial Cartoonist Union to draw Muhammad as they see him. These are the words of one of the editors of the Jyllands-Posten, Flemming Rose. That quote was taken from an essay printed in a Danish newspaper, Jyllands-Posten, on September 30th, 2005, as part of a piece called The Face of Muhammad. This featured 12 cartoons, some of which would be considered blasphemous to some Muslims, and in fact many local Muslims were offended. A group of Danish Muslim community leaders, who the local media would call the Mad Mullahs, demanded a retraction of some of the cartoons. When their demands were not met, they resorted to deception and incitement of the Muslim world, lighting a fuse that would explode in what is now known as the Muhammad Cartoon Crisis, or the Jyllands-Posten Muhammad Cartoon Controversy, and so on. Richard Dawkins calls it a ludicrous episode which veered wildly between the extremes of comedy and tragedy. In this crisis, hundreds of people were injured or killed. There were demonstrations, riots, buildings burned.
The Danish embassy in Damascus is put on fire.
Diplomatic relations damaged, the Danish economy strained under international boycotts, lawsuits, UN resolutions passed that weaken freedom of speech, and more. This controversy is a very important chapter in the story of Everybody Draw Muhammad Day. In early 2005, in Denmark, it had been reported that the Danish author Kari Bleujen, if I'm saying that right, had written a children's book titled The Quran and the Life of the Prophet Muhammad, and had trouble finding an illustrator willing to depict Muhammad. He said that the first 3 illustrators he asked had refused for fear of Muslim terrorist attacks. This has not been confirmed, however. Bleujen claims that they gave reasons like the murder of Theo Van Gogh. We're going to move on really fast from this, so pause the screen if you want these details, otherwise we're going to be moving on now. When he did find an illustrator, he or she preferred to remain anonymous. The editors of the Jyllands-Posten wished to see just how willing or unwilling to depict Muhammad the Danish illustrators were. On September 19th, 2005, Flemming Rose, the cultural editor of the Jyllands-Posten newspaper, sent out a letter to all 42 members of the Danish Editorial Cartoonist Union, inviting them to illustrate Muhammad as part of an informal experiment.
Draw Muhammad as you see him,
The letter asked. The letter said that this was also a stand against self-censorship and intimidation. Of course, this was nothing like a valid scientific experiment, which is why they put it in the cultural section. The illustrators were encouraged, almost dared, to show that they were not afraid. It has sometimes been said that this was a contest. Well, this was not a contest. All the illustrators that participated, all 12 of them, were paid their usual fee. Of the 42 members of the Danish Editorial Cartoonists Union, 12 responded with cartoons. I did the math, put it on the screen there. Though not all were of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam. If one were to believe Reza Aslan's article in response to these illustrations, one would think that they were all offensive, but as usual, Reza was being deceptive, like the other Muslims in the story, as we will see. Certainly not all were offensive. Some were ambiguous. Some were drawings of drawings. 2 cannot even be said to be of the Prophet Muhammad at all. One is a joke at the expense of the Jyllands-Posten. It shows a boy in the 7th grade at a particular school, Wolby, Denmark, named Muhammad, writing something in the Persian language in Arabic letters, and these words translate to, Jyllands-Posten's journalists are a bunch of reactionary provocateurs. His shirt says, the future, in Danish. But somehow they're all offensive, Reza? Really? What about nuance? What about sophistication? What about the whole text has no meaning but that which the reader brings to the text routine, Reza? I guess that doesn't apply when it doesn't suit your narrative, huh, Reza? If you're wondering who this Reza person is and why I'm talking about him, just pause your screen now. The cartoonists treated Islam the same way that they treat Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, and other religions. And by treating Muslims in Denmark as equals, they made a point. We are integrating you into the Danish tradition of satire because you are part of our society, not strangers. The cartoons are including, rather than excluding, Muslims. That's Fleming Rose, the Jyllands-Posten editor, 2006. 3 days after the cartoons were published, a meeting of Muslim organization leaders was called by Riyad Halail, if I'm saying that right. Riyad was already known in the Danish press as the Angry Imam, a preacher of, quote, pure unadulterated Wahhabism, unquote. This man, by the way, is so stupid that he tried to complain to the Pope about these Danish cartoons in the Danish newspaper because he thought the Pope had authority over a newspaper in a predominantly Protestant country.
You're so stupid!
Why was this idiot in charge of anything? Riyad is known as one of Denmark's man mullahs, along with these 3 other guys here who are at the meeting: Ahmed Akari, Abu Bashir, and Ahmed Abu Laban. All 4 of these men and others at this meeting already had ties with terrorist groups. Richard Dawkins calls them malevolent exiles and says, over the next 3 months, indignation was carefully and systematically nurtured throughout the Islamic world by a small group of Muslims living in Denmark. At this meeting it was decided that they will sue the Jyllands-Posten, write letters to complain to the Danish government and ambassadors of Muslim countries, contact the media inside and outside of Denmark, and to assemble a dossier to take on tour through the Muslim world. Though some say the dossier was put together by Riyad and others deny that, this dossier is known as the Akari Laban dossier and contains the 12 cartoons and some imposter images that the man mullahs added to deceive fellow Muslims. It is unclear who put the deceptive dossier together, and later, after their inevitable infighting, they would blame each other. As one reporter put it, as always, that there is an element of Monty Python-esque farce in these imams posturing as holy warriors while being welfare state spongers and constantly tripping up in their own lies. Farce, that is, if it were not so deadly serious. Some Muhammad images, like this bearded woman, and the more postmodern images were taken from the November 10th, 2005 edition of a Danish newspaper called Weekend Avisen. Then there were the 3 most offensive images that were not printed and were not supposed to be Muhammad. One was a photo of a bearded man with fake pig ears and a snout at a pig squealing contest in France. As Dawkins writes, the photograph had no connection whatsoever with the Prophet Muhammad, no connection with Islam, and no connection with Denmark. But the Muslim activists, on their mischief-stirring hike to Cairo, implied all 3 connections, with predictable results. Another was a photo of a prostrate man in a mosque being mounted by a goat, and another was a drawing of a horned pedophile. The Danish Muslims would later claim that these last 3 images were mailed to them, though when pressed for details, this story seems doubtful. As author Jytte Clausen writes, the folder has a note to the effect that these pictures were not published by the Jyllands-Posten, but if one leafs through the folder and just looks at the pictures, this is not obvious. The consequence, however, was that the Jyllands-Posten was blamed for the cartoons that the newspaper had never published. Few of the Middle Eastern leaders I interviewed knew the difference between the false cartoons and the real ones until I handed them the folder and explained. And everyone who had seen the dossier thought that the ugly, sexual, explicit cartoons had been published by the Jyllands-Posten. That's Clausen, 2009, pages 91 and 101. The dossier contained numerous falsehoods, including, as Richard Dawkins puts it, the tendentious lie that the Jyllands-Posten was a government-run newspaper. This lie probably had a lot to do with the attacks on the Danish embassies in the Middle East in the months to come. As Richard Dawkins writes, what these people really love and do best is pandemonium. Because of the deceitful way these mad mullahs arranged the dossier, and because they chose not to correct anybody, they fooled virtually everyone into thinking that all of the images were printed in the Jyllands-Posten. These liars knew that they were deceiving everyone. Later on, they would point the finger at each other and all would deny having done the actual deception. These men knew that they were practicing deception. I mean, later on, they would blame each other for the deception. This dossier was taken on a tour of deception through the Middle East, where they met with highly influential leaders starting in Egypt, then far and wide among political circles of the Arab world. In the following months and years, many groups, nations, and groups of nations would complain to the UN, the EU, the Danish government, and the Mad Mullahs would sue the Jyllands-Posten.
Boycotts crippled Danish companies for years.
Protests and violent demonstrations would erupt on almost all continents. Embassies and American businesses firebombed with many deaths. You see, in many places, Egypt particularly, the USA was blamed for the Danish cartoons. Despite the fact that the US government had criticized Denmark for the cartoons, there was no agreement on why exactly they were protesting and what their goals exactly were. The Mad Mullahs themselves did not agree with each other and would later feud. Hardly surprising. Some Muslims believe that Muhammad should only be depicted in a respectful manner. Other Muslims believe that Muhammad should never be depicted at all. Some believe that nothing living should be depicted. See Antitheism. And like I said, there was no agreement on what their demands were. They just knew they were angry. Most deaths would occur after the Jyllands-Posten apologized twice. When and where things heated up in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, Denmark pulled its diplomats out. Diplomatic relations were severed or strained for a long time thereafter. Death threats were issued and assassinations attempted, starting on...
Pause your screen for details.
October 8, 2005. Mosque leaders and Imams in Denmark demand that the paper apologize to all Muslims and retract some of the cartoons. All Muslims. Many more complaints and demands for apology would follow from many sources.
Pause your screen for details.
October 11th. The Mad Mullah, Rayed Halal, or something, appears on Al Jazeera TV, broadcasted internationally to speak about the cartoons and to deceive the audience. The shit hits the fan. Many audience members are upset, and international media outlets are fooled. October 12th, ambassadors and delegates representing 11 predominantly Muslim nations in Denmark send a letter to the Danish Prime Minister Anders Fogh Rasmussen to ask for a meeting. October 14th, meanwhile, after receiving more death threats, two of the cartoonists are relocated under protection. In Denmark's capital, Copenhagen, a reported 3,500 people take part in a protest against the paper. Over the following months, many more protests and demonstrations, some violent, some deadly, would be staged throughout the world, on every continent but South America and Antarctica, including, but not limited to those on your screen.
Pause your screen.
October 17th, Al-Fagar, I have no idea how to say that, an Egyptian newspaper reprints half of the cartoons. No one was threatened, and the paper's office was not attacked. However, copies were confiscated from the newsstands. Some or all of the 12 cartoons, the Danish cartoons, will be republished many more times in the future, including but not limited to these here on the screen.
Pause.
October 21st, Prime Minister Rasmussen sends a letter in response to the ambassadors and delegates not to comply with their request, but to tell them, quote, free speech goes far and Danish government has no influence on what the press writes, unquote. October 24th, Prime Minister Rasmussen publicly states that he declines to meet with the ambassadors and announces, quote, it is so obvious what our basic principles are that there is no basis for having a meeting, unquote. November 16th, in a visit to Denmark, Turkey's Prime Minister, I'm not even going to bother trying to say his name, complains about the situation, and Prime Minister Rasmussen replied that he will, quote, simply not compromise. This is about how a democracy works, unquote. December 2nd, Danes are warned not to travel or to remain in Pakistan after a reward is offered for the murder of one of the Danish illustrators by a Pakistani sheikh, or sheikh, who is associated with the Islamist political party in Pakistan. December 3rd, the Mad Mullahs arrive in Egypt with their dossier. These deceivers will go on to meet with religious authorities, the Foreign Ministry, and the Secretary General of the Arab League, Muslim leaders, and government officials in Mecca, Libya, Syria, and so on. 2006, January 1st, in his New Year's Day speech, Prime Minister Rasmussen reminds the world that anti-authoritarianism and satire are part of Danish culture. And see, this is something that people on both sides of this issue fail to understand. Cultural relativism does not actually mean that all cultures are equal except for white, Western European American culture. This is not some Orwellian thing like an Animal Farm where all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. No. Cultural relativism simply means that Danish culture is not any less than Muslim cultures. And so Danish anti-authoritarian culture and freedom of speech, culture, liberty, and all that is not any less valid than the culture that says drawing Muhammad is bad. Furthermore, not that the Prime Minister mentioned this, but in Danish culture one does not apologize for anything other than what you have done intentionally wrong. One does not apologize for accidents, one does not apologize for other people, yet a lot of people around the world were calling on the Danish government to apologize for a Danish newspaper, which in their culture is ludicrous. Why does no one care about Danish cultural values? Listen to the Danish cartoonist Kurt Vestergaard on this.
I hope that these people, they would respect the Danish democracy.
Og der er jeg nødt til at sige, at vi er fuldstændig stålsatte i den sag. Vi står helt fast på, at der skal være en vidtgående ytringsfrihed, som også indeholder retten til kritisk debat om religion.
The Danish public prosecutor rules that the lawsuit of the Mad Mullahs versus the Jyllands-Posten for blasphemy laws will not go forward, as there are no legal grounds for doing so. The Mad Mullahs appeal the following day. Now, this is ridiculous, of course, because one cannot blaspheme against the Islamic religion unless one is a Muslim. As Stefan Charbonnier says in his book here, Open Letter, a believer can blaspheme only to the extent that the idea of blasphemy holds any meaning for him. A non-believer, no matter how hard he tries, cannot blaspheme. January 24th, Prime Minister Rasmussen responds to the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights by saying that Denmark, quote, has nothing to be ashamed of, unquote, with regards to the cartoon fair. January 26th, Norwegian government apologizes for the magazine Magasinet's publication of the cartoons. If you had paused your screen earlier, the list of reprints, you would have seen that on January 10th, the Norwegian magazine Magasinet, if I'm saying that correctly, reprinted all 12 of the Danish Muhammad cartoons, so that's why they were apologizing. January 28th, Jyllands-Posten posts an official apology to Denmark's Muslim citizens online. They did not yet know about the imposter cartoons, though, those on your screen there. This will be reiterated 3 days later. January 30th, Prime Minister Rasmussen again points out that the Danish government cannot control the media and that there is no reason for it to apologize for the media. However, the Jyllands-Posten apologizes a second time. On this same day, January 30th, armed men invade the EU office in the Gaza Strip and demand an apology from the EU for the cartoons. Now think about that. Small Danish newspaper prints cartoons, they expect the EU to apologize for them, even though the newspaper had already apologized twice. Think about that. However, the EU did condemn the cartoons and violent protesters alike. They weren't completely regressive there. Prime Minister Rasmussen of Denmark appears on TV and says, quote, the government cannot say sorry for a Danish newspaper, unquote. January 31st. The offices of the Jyllands-Posten are evacuated after receiving bomb threats despite their 2 apologies. As protests continue all over, jihadis now join in the protests in the streets of Gaza. By the end of January 2006, the real and imposter images were the top news story in TV channels throughout the Middle East. Most report that all of the images were printed in the Jyllands-Posten. See how far the deception of the Mad Mullahs has traveled? February 1st. No less than 12 European newspapers reprint some or all of the 12 cartoons. A second bomb threat is issued to the Jyllands-Posten and their offices are evacuated again. February 2nd. In Gaza City, armed men stormed the EU office. In the West Bank, a German civilian schoolteacher is taken hostage. Okay, now remind me again when that artist made Piss Christ, or when that other artist used, I think, elephant dung to help make a picture of the Virgin Mary, and when South Park and when Family Guy makes fun of Jesus. Remind me again, who gets kidnapped? exactly? What embassies are burned? How many hundreds of people are murdered over that? Okay, now, I'm not a fan of any religion whatsoever, but let's not kid ourselves. Not all religions are equal at any given point in history or any place in the world. As we know, there's only one religion at this point in history who will kill you if you offend them. Didn't Bill Maher say something like that?
It's the only religion that acts like the mafia, that will fucking kill you if you say the wrong thing, draw the wrong picture, or write the wrong book.
February 2nd, 2006, with the support of the Prime Minister's party, the Danish People's Party announces it will investigate the troublemaking Mad Mullahs. Also, February 2nd, images of some of the cartoons are quickly shown on British TV, and more papers reprint the cartoons as demonstrations and protests continue in many cities on a few different continents. February 3rd, as demonstrations and protests continue in many cities, on Al Jazeera, broadcast internationally, a popular Muslim TV preacher, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, if I'm saying that right, calls for a day of rage. Mosques all across the Middle East, the cartoons are condemned. In Indonesia, the Danish embassy is invaded by hundreds. The ambassador explains to them that the Jyllands-Posten had already apologized, so they left. February 5th, one protester dies in Beirut as the Danish consulate is burned. February 6th, more protesters die in demonstrations in Afghanistan, Kashmir, Somalia, and Indonesia. A Catholic priest is shot in Turkey in revenge for the cartoons. February 7th, it comes out that the Danish Imams had been deceiving everyone with their imposter cartoons, claiming that the Jyllands-Posten printed them. These mad mullahs are accused of treason and deceit. February 8th, the French paper Charlie Hebdo reprints all 12 of the Danish Muhammad cartoons plus one of their own. Now, Charlie Hebdo had printed cartoons of Muhammad before the Jyllands-Posten had, but there was nothing but, according to the editors, a couple of letters of complaint. Certainly not this huge international outcry, probably because there were no mad mullahs running around with their deception. Charlie Hebdo had printed images of Muhammad before, and they will again, but after that they will be bombed twice, and members of the staff will die. Now, pause your video here for details on this. February 8th, Russian President Vladimir Putin condemns the cartoons and calls on the Danish government to apologize, despite the fact that the newspaper apologized twice and that the Danish government had nothing to apologize for. Also, February 8th, the Jyllands-Posten editor announces that the paper will print the winner of the Iranian Holocaust cartoon contest.
I can tell you that my newspaper is trying to establish a contact to that Iranian newspaper, and we would run these cartoons the same day as they will publish them.
On the 16th, the EU passes a resolution condemning the, quote, abuse of free speech, unquote, to insult religious figures, and condemns the violence. Now, it's good that they condemn the violence, but this abuse of free speech, you know it's abuse of free speech? Laws against it. Laws against free speech. That's abuse of free speech. Also on the 17th, Pakistani Muslim religious figure Maulana Muhammad Yusuf offers a car and $25,000 as a reward for the murder of one of the cartoonists. And in India, Qureshi offers their own weight in gold for anyone who would behead one of the cartoonists. February 18th, in Nigeria, 45 people would be killed and 185 injured. Also on this day, February 18th, in London, very large demonstration, estimated 10,000 people. Now keep in mind this is in London. Take for example this sign. How nice. I think maybe this guy needs a hug. Look at this one, freedom of expression, go to hell. Well, you know what, he does have the right to express that. But he doesn't want the right to express that. Liberalism, go to hell. Okay, now, Keep in mind, this is London. Look at this sign. Now look who's holding this sign. Look at this. Massacre. Behead. Annihilate. Exterminate. Massacre. Exterminate. Exterminate. February 24th, an estimated 200 die in a clash in a protest in Pakistan between Christians and Muslims. 200 people dead. It's a shame. I got that figure of the 200 dead from Jyllands-Posten's book. However, that figure is not included in the table that you can see on your screen. So for some reason you have to add those 200 to the 241 to 248 estimated deaths on this table just to get the deaths for 2006 alone.
Pause.
In Bandung, if I'm saying that right, Indonesia, a mob invades hotels, grabbing Europeans and demanding they denounce the cartoons. February 25th, the UN has a meeting about the cartoons and decides to make a resolution that will declare respect for religious figures to be a human right. So, I ask, is this really wise to give more rights to either historic figures or imaginary characters? More rights to them than to individuals. The individual's right of freedom of expression and to critique ideas. Well, it's certainly illiberal insofar as it violates one of the two core principles of liberalism, that being liberty, freedom of expression, etc. But that's a story for another video or entire books. February 26th. More violence in demonstrations in Iran, Pakistan, more embassies are attacked and protests continue all over. March 1st. Salman Rushdie, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and 10 others put out a manifesto to show their support for the Jyllands-Posten and condemning the Islamic fundamentalism. The manifesto urged opposition to the sort of multiculturalism that gives Muslims special privileges. March 20th. Osama bin Laden threatens Europe over the cartoons. April 12th. South Park airs episode 143, inspired by the Jyllands-Posten Muhammad Cartoon Controversy. The episode included the character of Muhammad, however, Comedy Central would not air the episode unless they blocked it out with the censor block you can see there. But this is a whole other story, probably a subject for another Everybody Draw Muhammad Day video, perhaps next year.
Pause your screen.
July 31st, a terrorist plot in Germany fails. 2 bombs on a train in Cologne fail to explode. 2 Lebanese students, Jihad Hama and Yusuf al-Hajdib, are arrested for the crime. They were seeking revenge in response to the cartoons and other grievances. On September 25th, in Germany, a performance of an opera by Mozart featuring religious figures and even their decapitated heads, including Muhammad's head, is cancelled. The company, understandably, had security concerns due to the sensitivity of one particular religion. However, get this, Chancellor Angela Merkel, along with others, called for the opera to go on with the performance, and they did. Now that's interesting because that's 2006. I wonder if Angela Merkel would have the same position on that today. It'd be interesting. I predict that at some point this is going to come up in the future and she's going to have a different position. She's going to defend the Islamist approach. November 27th, it is reported that the Danish mad mullahs that started the trouble, quote, were later caught on hidden camera by a French documentary filmmaker bragging about their exploits, unquote. Let that sink in. Deception, treason against their home country of Denmark, over 200 people dead, and they brag about their exploits. Nice. 2007, March 30th, UN Human Rights Commission passes that resolution prohibiting the defaming of religious figures. Ideas have more rights than humans. February 24th, an estimated 200 die in a clash in a protest in Pakistan between Christians and Muslims. 200 people dead. It's a shame. I got that figure of the 200 dead from Jyllands-Posten's book, however, that figure is not included in the table that you can see on your screen. So for some reason you have to add those 200 to the 241 to 248 estimated deaths on this table just to get the deaths for 2006 alone.
Pause.
In Bandung, if I'm saying that right, Indonesia, a mob invades hotels, grabbing Europeans and demanding they denounce the cartoons. February 25th, the UN has a meeting about the cartoons and decides to make a resolution that will declare respect for religious figures to be a human right. So, I ask, is this really wise to give more rights to either historic figures or imaginary characters? More rights to them than to individuals. The individual's right of freedom of expression and to critique ideas. Well, it's certainly illiberal insofar as it violates one of the two core principles of liberalism, that being liberty, freedom of expression, etc. But that's a story for another video or entire books. February 26th. More violence in demonstrations in Iran, Pakistan, more embassies are attacked, and protests continue all over. March 1st, Salman Rushdie, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and 10 others put out a manifesto to show their support for the Jyllands-Posten and condemning the Islamic fundamentalism. The manifesto urged opposition to the sort of multiculturalism that gives Muslims special privileges. 2008, February 12th, police in Denmark arrest 3 for plotting the murder of Danish cartoonist Kurt Vestergaard of the Jyllands-Posten, he's the one who made that cartoon there, editor Flaming Rose, and others at the Jyllands-Posten. All 3 were part of the Mad Mullah's Hilarious, that guy's, circle. February 13th. In response to this, 16 Danish newspapers print Kurt Vestergaard's cartoon. June 2nd. A car bomb explodes at the Danish embassy in Islamabad, Pakistan. 8 are killed, 24 injured. All were Danish or Pakistani. Al-Qaeda claims they did this in response to the cartoons in a press release, which also warned the infidels, quote, "This should serve as a warning to the infidel countries in terms of crimes against the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. They must immediately apologize, otherwise this will only be the first step." 2010, January 1st, an axe and knife-wielding intruder breaks into the home of Kurt Vestergaard. Vestergaard retreats to his panic room, and the police apprehend the terrorist, who, the police reported, had ties with Al-Qaeda. Vestergaard has lived under police protection ever since. Then on April 20th, 2010, artist Molly Norris puts out this poster, pictures of Muhammad there, where she calls for Everybody Draw Muhammad Day on May 20th, 2010, which would be the first Everybody Draw Muhammad Day. 2013, Jyllands-Posten editors Flaming Rose, Carsten Julst, cartoonist Kurt Vestergaard, and artist Lars Wilks, look him up, he did this here and that's a whole other story.
Pause your screen for details.
And Stefan Charbonnier, editor of Charlie Hebdo, are all put on Al-Qaeda's hit list. Stefan Charbonnier survived the 2011 terrorist attack on the Charlie Hebdo office, but he was killed in the attack on January 7th, 2015, but not before he finished this book here, a few days before he was killed. Last laugh goes to him. So far, Fleming Rosa, Carsten Julst, and Kurt Vestergaard, and Lars Wilks are all still alive. The effects of all this continues to this day, and the chapter is not yet closed, although new chapters have begun. Everybody Draw Muhammad Day was in part inspired by these events, but would not actually start until the whole South Park cartoon controversy. But that's a different chapter. Then there's the Lars Wilks chapter, the Charlie Hebdo chapter. Before all that was the Theo Van Gogh chapter. Before that, the Salman Rushdie chapter, and more. But these are all stories for another time. Now, during all of this, and after this, as with the Charlie Hebdo attacks and other incidents, there have been many people who claim to be left/liberal, who actually blame the victims in this situation. Blame the Danish cartoonists and editors, and they blame the Charlie Hebdo victims, all 12 of them, before they were even buried. Would you blame the victim of rape? What if they were dressed provocatively? Did they provoke their attacks? Would you blame them? Well, why would you blame the victims of terrorism? Do these victims of rape and physical assault provoke their attackers? No. Everyone has the right to dress how they want, to say what they want, to practice freedom of expression without being physically assaulted. If you don't agree with this, you are not liberal. You are the regressive left. They are against the freedom of some speech. Oh, they're in favor of speech. Well, in favor of some speech, but not freedom of speech. And they are in favor of giving certain groups special privileges. Check your privilege. These people want to uphold Muslim cultural values, but for some reason they don't give a crap about the values of French culture, Danish culture, American culture. You know, the whole freedom and equality thing? So these people are against equality as well as being against freedom.
You're so stupid!
So they are against both core liberal principles, freedom and equality, and yet they're liberal. Really? You're against liberalism and you want me to call you a liberal.
You're an idiot!
Now, to be accurate and to be fair, not all regressive left people agree on this issue. I mean, take Cenk Uygur from TYT, for example. He's on the side of the cartoonists and not the terrorists on this issue.
But I don't think this is a compromise that we should make. To say, oh, no, you're right, Muslim countries. We're so sorry for offending your sensibilities here in the West. And that's not the way Western society is set up. And that's not the way Eastern society should be set up, or Muslim societies.
Or at least he was during the Danish Muhammad Cartoon Controversy of 2006-2007, but I don't know if he changed his position by the time the Charlie Hebdo Muhammad Cartoon Controversy happened. But the point is, not all regressive left people agreed on this particular issue. However, all people who are against freedom of speech, who claim to be on the left, are regressive left people for sure. But there are many of you, and I know because I've conversed with hundreds of you who claim to be left/liberal, who are against freedom of speech, who blame the victim.
You're an idiot!
See, now here's the thing. You will not win. You will lose. In fact, you are losing. We will expose you and expel you, and we are doing just that. And we are removing you from the left/liberalism. If you just Google the term regressive left and look at the dates, you'll see that it's gone from a little whisper to a roar in just a few years. And now you have a big, big backlash against you regressive left people from real liberals who stand for core liberal principles, the principles of freedom and equality. Yes, we will expose you and we will expel you. And you will lose, we will win. Now enjoy these images of Muhammad for Everybody Draw Muhammad Day 2016, starting with your submissions. Thanks to everyone who sent me these.